Okay, let's see. Don't forget there are handouts in the handout section. We have the all docs, which is a combination of a lot of documents for we've reviewed a great deal of them. There's an HR audit checklist that we'll be taking a look at. There's a packet on recruiting a more diverse workforce. I believe it's from Berkeley. It's got some really great information in there. And then we have some project evaluations, evaluation reports, and project performance evaluation in there. So make sure to download those. And that way you've got all the documents you might possibly need, some templates to use. Again, I do encourage you, you don't have to just plug those in. You can rearrange them, analyze it, and figure out which pieces are important, and then, make your own if necessary. All right, so welcome to Proof of Impact, Auditing and Evaluation. So the main purpose of this session is to focus on, as it says, auditing and evaluating. And we're going to talk about the difference between the two. But essentially, if you don't have these two things, you don't have a way of verifying that the efforts were worthwhile in your project, right? So we want to make sure we have that skill set and understand what these terms mean. So an audit is an examination or inspection of various documents by an auditor, followed by physical checking of inventory to make sure that all departments are following documented policies and procedures. So this is where you can have something like a checklist, right? That tells you exactly what's supposed to be, what you're supposed to see and what's supposed to happen, and you're verifying that. So when we audit a project, remember, we've been talking about implementing equitable hiring practices as a project. So when we are auditing a project, these are some of the things that we would look at. The development and progression of the program was followed, right? So we decided how we were going to implement our program, and now we know what steps we're supposed to take, and those steps have been taken. The documents are clear and understandable. So there's no confusion about which document this is, which version this is. Again, remember, we're keeping everything up to date so we can track it. We make sure that these documents are accessible to our various stakeholders at an appropriate level. So this is so if your board members or your superintendent needs to pull these documents for some reason, everyone knows where to go and get the documents the information they need at their level. And then changes to documents are clear. Again, we talked about changing documents, ensuring versions. And then we have goals of the project are clearly defined, right? So we said we're going to implement, 10 policies to improve equitable hiring, the equitable hiring process, and that's what we've done. It may just also be that we're going to implement equitable hiring processes without that number, but then you have to have your metrics to determine whether or not you've reached your goals. So you have to come up with another metric, if not a number. And let's see here. So when we audit a program, what we're looking at is were hiring managers, did hiring managers attend training? Were the rubrics or adopted processes and procedures followed? Is there a clear justification? Do we have documents related to all qualified candidates and they're submitted to the point of contact? And are documents stored according to federal, state, and local requirements, in other words, law? So we've talked a lot about protecting the interests of the candidates that apply. Remember, there is a law about how to store PII. And so when you are collecting those documents, you need to make sure you have them stored appropriately. So we're going to talk a little bit about the different steps in an audit now. Oh, it's a little cut off for some reason here. You should be able to download it also. If not, I'll put it in the handouts. I'm not sure why it's cut off. So determining the scope of the project. Let's see, what will be the focus of the project? You're also looking at compliance, or more broadly, you're looking at what is included in your strategic and programmatic elements. A few of these areas to include would be, if you're looking at, you're going to be speaking with benefits and payroll administrations. In other words, when we're talking about, we talked a little bit about how sometimes a person may come in with a different compensation or different benefits, and that's an opportunity for inequities. We're looking at developmental training and practices, discipline and performance practices. All of these things are part of the overall process of equity that you can examine when you're auditing. So feedback and communication, diversity, equity, and inclusion, hiring and onboarding, safety of workers, succession and planning. These are all things that are part of the traditional HR audit. Let's see here. So when we talk about reviewing for compliance, remember we talked about there are different methods for project management, right? So when we have flexibility and we're thinking about implementing our own processes and procedures, we can use a much more flexible approach to managing our equitable hiring practices. We can take that agile approach. We can try something and then roll it back and then fix it and adjust it and then roll it back out. But when we talk about compliance, we're talking about what the law says must be done in that equitable hiring process. And remember, how the law defines equitable hiring practices is reducing barriers to qualified candidates, right? So keeping that in mind. So there are many areas of compliance that we could talk about. There are many in HR. You'll see it's a little bit blended in here with HR and equitable hiring policies. But the main thing is when we're talking about compliance and you're doing an audit is that you know which pieces of the law you need to be examining. So remember we talked about the justifications and things like that. Those are things that you're going to want to have, even though it's not law, you want to have those as part of your compliance, because what you don't want to happen is the first time you realize there aren't justifications for the people who are hired is when the Department of Justice or someone has filed a complaint against you in some other form, that you don't want the lawyers and the attorneys looking at your documents for the first time. You want to make sure you know what's in there and you have those justifications in place. So some of the things you're going to want to make sure are accessible and you're training folks on are the equal employment policy, equal employment opportunity policy, right? Cannot discriminate against these 8 classes. And in truth, you cannot discriminate. I mean, I think we can just use that. You cannot discriminate. Any discrimination could lead to liability. Whether it's protected classes or not, you could find yourself in a situation with liability. So anti-harassment policy, we talked about, we had a scenario where, someone was interviewing someone one-on-one, they closed the door behind them, and the person felt that that the interviewer was making inappropriate comments and filed a complaint. So make sure your hiring managers understand the anti-harassment policy and understands the comments that they can and cannot make with to people in general, to interviewers, but also to their subordinates in general. FMLA policy, if required, employment at will, if applicable in your state, you do need to let folks know if that is the case, if you're hiring for something that not everyone understands the at will, but at will means that you're allowed to fire when you want to, depending on what states you're in. If you're in the South, more than likely you don't have to worry about this piece. ADA accommodation. Remember, disability is oftentimes a gap in our equity. So people don't know what to do when you have a candidate who has a disability. And so remember, there's an expectation to make reasonable accommodation. And then drug and alcohol policy. So that's something, if they're going to need to be drug tested. Again, you can't ask a specific person for a drug test. You have to determine if drug testing is necessary for that position. And if so, when you go back and you complete your audit, you're going to make sure that all of these things are in place, right? We want to see all of these things have been addressed through the hiring process. So this is a basic, these are the basic pieces that you must have by law, essentially, when you're looking at an audit. So another one is personnel files. Remember, we talked about, so your candidates, your hiring managers are interviewing people, right? You're going to have in their personnel files, to start with, you're going to have that application, a resume, usually a criminal background check, possibly the results of their drug test, their references, right? The rubrics for why, with the justification for why they were hired. And then you're going to make sure that all of those things are compiled at any point. So you can go into those files and you have that there. Why was Bob hired? We have the entire packet. Now you still have to save your documents for any qualified applicants that you reviewed. You have to have a process for storing those documents. So again, if someone comes in to review your files, you know exactly what's in there. It's easy for them to find what they're looking for. It's easy to see the justification. It's easy to see that Bill had a higher score or a better outcome in the interview process than Bob. So keep in mind, you need to keep all of those things. There's some other ones regarding I-9. If someone is a resident or you're sponsoring them, those documents need to be in there. Remember, that is one of the protected classes, is immigration status. So you cannot use immigration status as a way of determining if someone should be hired within, meaning residence versus, a citizen. You can't differ between the two when you're hiring. Now, you can require that people are legally able to be employed in the U.S. That's a requirement as well. So within your documentation and in your files, you have those pieces as well. So just keep that in mind. So make sure you've got all those documents in the personnel file. And the reason for that, again, when we go back, we take our checklist, our auditing checklist, we're going to be checking off to make sure every one of those pieces are in there. And anything missing, then we know we have a gap that might show some inequity. So we want to make sure everything is in there. And then remember, these are specific pieces like personnel files and applications, but don't forget when you audit as an organization, beyond just compliance for law, you're checking to make sure all hiring managers have been trained. That's number one. Your audit, you can have either a process where if you're doing it autonomously and you've got, a nice setup that way, then what you would do is require them to send in proof or log in with their employee information to your system. But you want to first and foremost verify that all of your hiring managers have been through the training process. Remember, we talked about offering that opportunity in different formats to meet the diverse ways people learn. So a lot of times as educators and administrators working with our employees, we don't think about the way employees learn. And so remembering that when we talk about equity, even for our hiring managers, we want to have multiple ways within reason as much as possible for them to obtain and learn the information. All right. So let's talk about key metrics. The first place to start is reviewing or identifying key HR metrics that drive organizational success. These metrics include employee turnover, cost of employee acquisition, cost of employee retention, employee engagement scores, and many others. The reason why we identify our metrics in HR, because remember, we've talked a lot about dollars and budgets. Every one of these things has a dollar assigned to it. For every hour a person is working on this piece, or every hour you have to deal with posting a position because you've lost an employee, there's a dollar amount attached to that. So when you have your key metrics, right, these are aligned to your strategic goals, right, and your strategic metrics and measures as well. So then we can figure out which part of our metrics is the equitable hiring process in for our organization. So it's kind of easy to see this from here, but recruitment, hiring, and onboarding, position descriptions. Then we have performance management and compensation strategies. Performance management doesn't impact the hiring process, but compensation does. How do you determine someone's starting salary upon selecting that candidate? That can be another gap in equity. That's a frequent gap in equity. Succession planning and workforce planning. Essentially, we're talking about equitable hiring, but when we get to the end of this presentation, we'll be talking a little bit about recruitment as well. That's workforce planning, right? Keeping people in the pipeline who are, from these, who are qualified to meet our needs, so that we can more quickly move through the hiring process. And also, again, making sure we're doing it equitably. Employee engagement, employee communications, complaints and risk management, diversity, equity, inclusion. So these are HR metrics overall. The main ones that we're looking at in this process are the number one, recruitment, hiring, and onboarding, and then number two, specifically with position descriptions and compensation strategies, and then number three, succession planning and workforce planning. And remember, we talked yesterday about making sure we have multiple touch points with potential candidates. The first time if you are struggling to get applications in, then what it says is there's a gap in your recruitment process, right? You should have, we should be working toward creating, again, having applicants at the ready who've applied for the position. And then also developing our recruitment efforts, which can be a completely different project, but making sure we're recruiting from diverse backgrounds, leveraging the resources within the community, et cetera. And we'll talk a little bit more about that down the road. So this is part of DEI, these efforts. Remember, we watched a video yesterday that talked about gave a beautiful definition around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity is a given. It's not a decision. We live in a diverse world and country, and oftentimes, definitely states and our cities as well. So it's not a choice. It's not a decision about whether or not you want diversity. Diversity exists, right? Equity is how we measure and determine whether diversity is actually happening. And then inclusion, I can't remember the exact definition, but ensuring that everyone is present and has a sense of, they also talked about belonging, but people are actively engaged in that, in those communities. So keep that in mind as we're working as you're building out your initiatives, because although we're focusing on equity, there are other pieces to creating the culture around equity, around DEI. So, and just remember that, we're talking strategy, right? We talk a lot of strategy in these 5 sessions, and strategy is very important. But the thing that trumps strategy every time is culture. So it's not just about putting these processes into place and not having to deal with anything else. If you're talking about creating a culture of equity, a culture of inclusion and belonging, this is a piece of the overall strategy that you'll need to create to address the issues of culture that support these pieces. So planning for an audit. So we want to maximize our value of the audit, and we do that by planning. I mean, if nothing else, I think you see you've seen through this process, it's planning, 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 and planning, right? And the reason for that is it's very difficult to reach a goal, to be successful without planning. Planning helps you focus on the end goal, right? And then create, develop, and plan out your steps to reach that goal. So just like anything, when you're talking about auditing, you want to plan that out. And you can build in the audit once you determine what your quality metrics are in general. So when you're building out your plan and you're saying, we want to, implement equitable hiring processes, right? So then what do we know we have to have? We've created our policies, our procedures, our SOPs, our policies, which is our statements and requirements. So now we know through that development what has to be in place. So for every one of those measures, every one of those pieces, we now have a potential way of developing a metric to check and ensure that it's there. So a timeline for data collection, especially if data will be collected from multiple teams and departments. This is very important, not only in developing your project, but how soon after an offer has been made must all of the papers, all the documentation be submitted. Now, I will tell you, typically in when you have an HR department, what happens is you submit all of those documents together, right? And so there's no, nothing hanging on. If not, what happens is I will let the HR department know who I'm hiring, and then I will sit on those documents. They might get buried under other documents. They might get stuffed into my drawer. And remember, that's not a safe way to store PII. So make sure you have, you're thinking about how your audit is going to look like at the beginning of your project. You're planning that piece out. The other thing is dates for reporting findings to key stakeholders. We talked about scheduling yesterday. We are scheduling out our initiative from the very beginning, determining where we're going to have deliverables, right? Determining where our checkpoints are from the beginning of the project. Because remember, time is money. So if we go over time, then we are automatically over budget. Every hour costs something. If we go over time, then we go over budget. So please remember that. It's not free money. It's not a gimme when you have someone working on these additional, that it may be an additional piece of the work that they're doing if you don't have an HR department or someone who is in HR in general. So it's very important to understand the cost of doing the initiative in the project. So dates for reporting change implementation status to key stakeholders. Remember, we're keeping everyone abreast of what's happening. Schedule out your communications early. Are you going to communicate monthly? Are you going to communicate bi-weekly? Who needs to be communicated with and how often do they need to be communicated with? Write those things out because that's what you're going to do that's what you're going to use to audit your project to see if you've managed the project successfully. So this one is a big question that I get a lot is determining who will conduct the audit. There are two approaches, and you can do either. There's no wrong or right answer, but you can do it internally. The question is, who is the staff that will do it, making sure that they have the appropriate understanding of the project, as well as understanding of some of the laws around PII to do an audit. So you can do it. You can do it internally. You just have to figure out who's qualified and able to take that on. The other option is a third party. This is not unusual for large organizations. They may hire someone else. Would it be beneficial to use a third party to conduct the audit? You have to figure that out. And then the big thing is can those auditors be objective, right? You don't want someone coming in who can't be objective about what they may find, because your work, the purpose of the audit is to find something long before it ever becomes problematic. So you need to really be careful when you hire someone to come in as a third party, making sure you have those, I can't think of the term right now, but making sure they've signed an agreement that the information that they discover is private and they're not allowed to disclose it. So let me see. I see someone. My apologies. I have the wrong screen on. Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl. Culture always trumps strategy. Yes. Culture eats strategy for lunch. Very true. So, again, making sure you have a privacy agreement, a non-disclosure agreement, with whoever comes in to review your documents and files, etc. That's very important. Making sure you have a background check on whoever is being sent, because they will have access potentially to PII. So do your due diligence with your external companies. So let's talk about the kind of person who should do the audit, right? This person has to understand HR compliance, right? So they have to know the laws. And this is not huge, because by the time you get through this process, you will know the laws backwards and forwards. So it doesn't have to be someone with the HR title. A lot of districts don't have someone with HR background. They may not even have an HR department oftentimes. So it doesn't have to be someone who's an HR expert necessarily, but they do have to understand compliance, all of the different pieces, again, because you're analyzing, especially when it comes to compensation and benefits and things like that, how it's being determined that people are offered this pay, the starting pay, versus someone else. It doesn't hurt to have at least a consultant on who has an expertise and experience in the various HR functions, as well as payroll. And again, those benefits, understanding those pieces as well. The time and ability to acquire and analyze data and synthesize it, right? I mean, who has time? Nobody, right? No one has time right now. But it's worth making the time, again, to ensure you're protecting the organization's interest and reducing your liabilities. So the ability to work with key stakeholders to implement and execute the plan for future improvements. Our second session today is with a district leader who's gone through a lot of this process. And I told you before, they were in a consent order for over 40 years with the DOJ. And the superintendent just really found the right person to lead the project. And so that is a key piece. It's important to have the person high up enough to really impact change and influence the organization. And then also that person has to be backed by the superintendent. It has to be something that is important to the superintendent, because it does, again, she was spending probably about 50% of her time at some points making sure these efforts were going to be successful. So make sure you find the right project manager, someone who can work with the various stakeholders. They need to be emotionally intelligent. Not everyone has that skill. Sometimes they have great requirements, but not a lot of emotional intelligence. They may have a great heart, but not really be comfortable communicating with people up and down the organizational structure, including the community members. So the key is to finding the right person to lead these initiatives, and including the audit in this process. Is anyone familiar with? Has anyone ever done or participated in an HR audit of any kind? Or is this the first you're hearing about it? If it's the first you're hearing about it, I wouldn't feel bad. A lot of organizations Thank you, Sissy. Yeah, a lot of organizations don't do this, which is why they have such a huge exposure to liability when complaints is made. We talked about the story of Coca-Cola, who had to pay out, I mean, just hundreds of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, and they wanted it dismissed because they said they didn't know. They didn't have anyone reviewing those documents, and they didn't know there was a gap. And the judge dismissed it because I didn't know isn't a good excuse. I think someone typed that too. Oh, of course, Dr. Pastilla. Dr. Garth. Very good, Dr. Garth. Dr. Garth is presenting later. Yes, Dr. Garth was the rock star at the district who brought this, reined it all in. So really wonderful leader and great insight. She did a fabulous job. So she'll be talking in the second session today. So it's not oftentimes part of our process to do an audit. Even when you're talking about billion-dollar corporations, I mean, when you're talking about billion-dollar corporations, you can imagine, I mean, they have all the money in the world and all the access in the world to make sure it's done right, and they're struggling with it. So it's not unheard of that a small district or even a large district hasn't done an HR audit. But I encourage you to think about doing it. And, that's part of the reason why even though we're focusing on equitable hiring, you see, we have a few other things sticking its head in there because all of those pieces could be a point of liability. So find out what's going on in those spaces before someone comes along and says they're being discriminated against. Make sure you know what's happening long before someone has to come in. You don't want attorneys looking at your documents. I mean, that's just the bottom line. Not as the first group of people to see them. So internal versus external, we're still going to talk a little bit about that. If you're thinking of conducting an in-house or doing it yourself, an HR audit or an HR project checklist can help you identify the expertise needed. So as I mentioned before, you don't have to be an expert. Just get a team together to create that checklist for you so that you can go through it and make sure there aren't any gaps. And you may even just hire someone to do the checklist for you if you're unsure, unclear about it. That's not going to be a huge amount of money to have someone do that. But there are lots of free things online, and in the handouts you'll see a checklist as well. So it's a pretty good one, very thorough for different areas as well. So you can use that one, or like I said, you can always create your own. So you do need someone who understands the project. You don't necessarily have to be an HR expert. You have to be able to build the capacity to think appropriately about HR, and you can build that during the project, right? And then you have to be able to analyze data and assess whether you will get buy-in from key stakeholders. The checklist can also be helpful in determining whether an external HR auditor needs to be there or not. And then also put deadlines, scheduling. If you don't have scheduling, like I said, you probably have what we call waste, which is time and money that haven't actually led to impact or change. So you don't want to end up with a lot of waste on your efforts. So an external auditor can approach the HR functions with an objective perspective, which may alleviate any tension between the HR department and other departments or key stakeholders. They're neutral. So because when you're auditing, when you say the word audit, everybody's like, oh, I mean, and for good reason. We mostly think about auditing as somebody scouring over the things we did wrong, right? Looking for holes in the things, looking for things that are missing, looking for fault. And so it can be, if you're the person doing that in the district, there can be a toll that it takes on you. So having a third party is sometimes a better option, or even putting together a group so no one person stands out as the auditor who's looking for the gaps. The other thing is making sure, again, remember we talked about using the right language for the right target audience. So you don't have to use the term audit publicly or with your hiring managers, right? You can come up with another term. You're going to be doing, you have your checks and balances. You can remove those words that people have a lot of negative feelings about, like auditing and evaluation, and reframe them if you'd like. Review. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Cheryl. Review, yes, is a good term. Yes, because that's very good. Because audit can be off-putting. So just keep that in mind. You need a neutral observation tends to unearth other potential issues, because remember, we're part of the district as well, right? So sometimes it's hard for us to see our own gaps. This is where I highly recommend partnering with your EAC center, your Equity Assistance Center in your region. If you're not in the South, they are all over the country. If you are, then you should absolutely reach out to IDRA. They do lots of other things. They survey the community so you can find other equity gaps. But this is a process you can go through with support, free support, right? So you don't have to necessarily come out of pocket for these pieces. Additionally, an external auditor's experience with other companies can help the organization learn about new ideas that could better assist the HR function, right? So bringing in somebody who is in this space and not only can see the gaps you don't see, but also has a plethora of experience and knowledge from working with other districts can be a real benefit to the organization. Consider the costs, right? As a project manager, that for me is the big one. I love to come in on time, on cost. Like I said, time is money. So if you don't have scheduling and you don't have dates and targets and all of those things, you're going to end up being over budget. And we're responsible for using the dollars in a way that is positive, creates positive impact for the communities that we're serving. So don't waste time. Wasting time is wasting money. So, but we consider the cost. The final decision may come down to time and cost, determining whether you hire externally or internally, or you partner with your Equity Assistance Center. It may come down to cost. As I mentioned before, equity centers provide free services, so you don't really have to come out of pocket for those things. You can partner with your Equity Assistance Center to do these things. They may not do every bit of these pieces, but they can help you build the capacity to do this within your district. So that's an important piece to consider as well. Consider who will be involved in acquiring the data, analyzing it, and developing findings and suggesting improvements. All of those have a cost to them. That's time. Keep in mind the opportunity cost of other projects that will sit idle while the audit is ongoing. This is why the planning is so important, right? So that we understand the best time of year to do it, right? We understand when people are most likely to be available. We understand what other things might be competing for our time, because this is important in order to protect our organization to do these pieces. But we have lots of things that are important. So we need to make sure we're planning and scheduling. That's part of the strategy piece, right? So finally, consider the data. The data needs to be acquired or analyzed. Is it readily available and integrated into current operations? The time needed will be reduced. So this comes into our project management piece and overall planning. If you keep good track of things and you make sure everything is managed during the entire project, then when it comes to analyzing your data, it's not going to be difficult. And so when I say, managing and planning, that includes how you want people to turn in that packet, right? Because not all people are organized or neat, and, they may crumple it up and fold it and stick it in places, or it may not be in any particular order. Let people know all of those details. What order do you want? Do you want the recommended candidate and the justifications with their file on top, and then the rest of them ranked, in ranking below. But figure out what is going to be the smartest way to get your data stored in a way that is easy to analyze. In addition to the cost of hiring an external auditor, consider the possibility that external auditor finding anything that may result in litigation. Remember, Non-Disclosure Act, you're hiring them. So you want to make sure that whatever a external auditor that's being paid fines stays within the organization, so you have enough time to address it. Again, make sure you do those criminal background checks and verify anyone who's going to be touching your internal documents needs to be properly vetted. So if you have concerns that certain HR practices may pose a litigation threat, consider incorporating an external legal advisor to help conduct the audit. Most school districts already have someone who handles legal, so they can help you make sure whatever the agreement is protects the interests of your organization. And some consider the audit scope, work hours required, data collected to determine the appropriate team to carry out the audit. So scope, what are you auditing? All right, we're not auditing things that aren't necessary for this effort. Work hours required, how long is it going to, what time do you want to dedicate to the audit process? And then the data collection, so who's going to collect it, and then also who's going to review it, because those things are not necessarily the same person. Any questions or comments so far? Determine the time frame for the audit to completion. We talked about this. Schedule. Lay out a calendar for when certain steps will occur and milestones will be achieved. Decide whether the audit will be done in a full or condensed time period, or if it will be done piecemeal or on a reoccurring basis. So what needs to be audited regularly, and then what needs to be audited periodically. I do think when you're hiring for a position, you want some eyes on, you get that recommendation for the approved candidate. You want to go through it before you notify the candidate. Make sure you have addressed all of the liability issues before you let that candidate know. Because before you let the candidate know, you still have a chance to make some adjustments. I mentioned before, there was a case where someone was asked to come back for a second interview because they hadn't followed the proper procedures in the first one. And so they were able to redo it, and make sure everything was correct. So they were doing that for their HR. I guarantee you that particular district has a large HR team, and they were like, no. So just again, I would suggest that in general, someone in HR is taking a look when you choose a candidate, just a quick, check sheet, or you can hand the hiring managers a check sheet for them to do their own quick audit to make sure it's all aligned. You receive it, you look at it, it's all good, everything's checked, verified, and then store that data. Decide whether the audit will be done in full or condensed time period, or if it will be done in piecemeal, as we said before. Consider capacity constraints, internal initiatives, and other workload requirements that may affect staff availability, even if the audit is conducted by a third party, right? If someone comes into your district, including IDRA or an EAC center, they still have to have a point of contact. And Dr. Garth will tell you later on, it's still a lot of work and time for somebody in your district to be that person of contact as well. So you need to figure out, again, you're going to calculate those costs. You're going to calculate those costs to make sure you know what it's really, what the investment really looks like. Ensure you set manageable timeframes for delivery, incorporating extra time to adjust for scheduled time off and other issues that invariably arise. So you want to set realistic timeframes for doing all of this work. If someone comes in and says, we'll be done in 3 months, well, it's not likely possible unless you have very little things to make adjustments to. And that might be true. You may not have a lot to change, but be kind to yourself. There's a lot going on right now, so be kind to yourself. Again, this is typically a 12 to 18 month process. So it means you're not going to see the end results immediately. You're stepping toward the end goal of having these things in place within a 12 to 18 month period. Communicate and conduct the audit. Make the organization aware of the audit and what to expect. And so Cheryl already helped us come up with another word, which is review. So we're going to make the organization aware of the review process and what to expect. So we want our hiring managers to know what you're looking for, because the more they know, the more likely they are to make sure that it's there, right? If they know you're looking for all the checks and balances with the rubrics and, how long the job was posted, did it follow those policies, all those pieces, and they'll make sure that those are in there. Again, you can summarize that with a checklist for them to help them, but that way you're setting them up for success. So again, even if we use new terms, people are smart. So they know it's still an audit, and that you may still be looking for things that are not done correctly. I think what they need to know is that the goal isn't to, find them and punish them, but it's to better understand the kind of supports they need to be successful at this, right? So you're not looking for failures unless you may find that someone repeatedly refuses to follow the policies and procedures. But again, you now have options because it is a policy, right, in place that applies to everyone. So during the audit, document findings. Yes, Cheryl. Cheryl says she agrees it's important that they take it serious and see it as a learning process. Yes. And I think, again, what I have seen is most hiring managers are very, very happy because they have no HR exposure or experience. And when they find out how many liabilities they actually had for themselves, for their own safety, to protect their career interests, they are very happy to have tools that would keep them from, being on the hot seat in a court of law or whatever the case may be. They don't want to be the weakest link, the weak chain. They want to also protect their organization as well. And so it's rare that I have seen anyone who, had no stomach for it. Most people, like I said, when they realize the liability, they're very happy to participate. So during the audit, document findings and keep relevant information in a centralized location to allow stakeholders to confirm information later if there are questions regarding the findings. So, you'll determine who you're going to share your findings with. Again, that's why it's so important to have a non-disclosure agreement with any outside organization that you're paying, because you want to be the one who decides what to do with the findings, especially if it's not a consent order or because of someone has filed a complaint against you or suing you. You want to maintain control of that information, so you have a chance to analyze it and appropriately adapt. So you have to figure out the best way to share that information. And don't, a lot of times when you're doing an audit, again, just the word makes you think of finding things that are wrong. Make sure you're finding things that are right too, that you're sharing out those pieces. We've got everyone trained. All the hiring managers are trained and now familiar with the law. So they're all equipped to help us reduce liabilities in the hiring process, right? So that's a big deal. If you look and you say everyone successfully used a rubric, right? Everyone had a justification in their recommendation, or 96% it had their recommendation. Don't just think about it in terms of the negative side. Think about it in terms of the positive. Because if you look at your files now, you probably have a lot of mistakes, a lot of liabilities. But when you communicate to your stakeholders, you can say we went from 2%, all the way to 96% using policies and procedures and processes that protect us and keep us from liabilities or reduce liabilities. So consider assessing a level or risk rating to the organization and the audit findings, right? So if you see that you're 90%, right, you're doing pretty well. And so your risk of liability is drastically reduced. You could probably give yourself an A, right? If you're in the 90s, and if you're in the 80s, you have a B, and the 70 a C, and so on. But those are terms that stakeholders understand as well when working in education. So understand how you're going to communicate the findings. And right now there is no level assessed right now. There's not like a national level of, you're an A+ organization or et cetera yet. That's probably coming down the pipeline. But I think that finding a way to help people understand what your level is a smart way to communicate with stakeholders. Any questions or comments? So we kind of talked about the assigning, an assessment level to ourselves. Now we talk about really presenting the findings and develop an action plan. Remember, we talked about different target audiences need different information because they're concerned about different things, right? So everything that you're communicating needs to be adapted to the specific audience. So when you're talking about your board, again, you may want something that gives a high-level overview, right? Possibly an infographic. Maybe an infographic for the complete findings is too small or not big enough, but something that will give them the quick overview with the opportunity to dig in deeper if they were interested. When you're communicating to your community at large, it needs to be something simple, a few bullet points, maybe 3 to 5 bullet points, a potential infographic that shows you moving down the path to equity, something along those lines that helps them really grasp it quickly. So inform relevant stakeholders of the findings and develop a plan to shore up deficiencies. So when you release your findings, you at the same time want to release your plan to address any deficiencies. So what you don't want is to release those things, release your findings without the plan on how you're going to address them. So make sure those two things are released together. Develop a plan to show up your deficiencies, take advantage of opportunities. When preparing a report to your stakeholders, be prepared to edit and provide different versions of the report to various stakeholders. We just talked about that. For example, the board CEO may want high-level overview, while the leaders responsible for each function may want to know, exactly what was missing. So remember, we talked about you're probably going to need tech, you're going to need HR, you're going to need all of your hiring managers, et cetera. So they're going to want to know if there's an issue in their department. So you're going to also want to provide them with information on, 96% of your applicants were 96% of the positions you posted follow the appropriate policies and procedures. Hopefully it's not in the lower percentage, but letting them know where they're at as well. Prepare a plan with designated responsible parties and timeframes to assess each area of the audit to correct the known issue or take advantage of opportunities presented. I would say, again, before you're communicating findings, I would not, and that's more like a a tip or trick not to release your findings without the suggested approaches. You can still solicit suggestions from your stakeholders, but I find that if there are negative findings, a lot of negative findings, letting them know you have a plan kind of calms the nerves and the fear. It makes it more palatable as well. Any questions or comments so far? All right, we are powering through. Quality metrics. HR audits can be high value projects for an organization. Remember, we talked about the benefits of equity, of diversity, equity, and inclusion. They improve and increase positive student outcomes. That is based on research. If you're a company trying to make money, it improves your profits. It improves culture of the organization. So there are lots and lots of benefits. So there should be a vested interest in everyone ensuring that there's an equitable hiring process, because the outcomes benefit all. And remember, diversity is not an option. It exists already. So the inclusion is oftentimes, the equity and inclusion is oftentimes where we see the gap, but diversity is not an option. It's already there. By planning well, you can avoid delays, mishaps that diminish the return of the audit. Identify your quality metrics and include it in the training. Let people know what you're looking for when you're going to review. Cheryl, I'm going to be using review forever now. I'm never going to say audit. Again, I'm going to say review to hiring managers. So I let them know what you're looking for. Set them up for success. Let them know you're looking for, that they've gone to the training, that they've used their appropriate rubrics. If you're adopting rubrics, that they have a justification. You're looking to see if they posted the position, according to policy. All of those things, so that they're confident that they can be successful at it. And don't add a lot of things that aren't necessary, that just make you feel like things are going better. Don't ask folks for stuff that's not needed. Remember, we talked about it with adults. If you ask them for something that doesn't solve a problem, then you're not going to get any participation or engagement. So share quality metrics with stakeholders. Let them know, again, what those metrics are, how you're going to measure it, how you're going to determine. So if you're going to assign yourself a grade level, do it up front. You're going to say, A to B is 90%, A is 90%, B is 80% and above, and so on. Share those metrics up front so that they are also aware of how to determine success. And I will tell you, because that can become another point of equity, right? As someone who is familiar with research, I know that you can make your audit and your results seem positive, no matter how not positive they are. So if you are creating the metrics at the end, it tends to look like you're doing that. So be upfront about your metrics early on. Like I said, I would not release the findings until I had a potential solution or path to address them, but I would set my metrics up early on. All right. Uh-oh. Am I frozen here? Nope. Okay, there we go. So it is suggested that the audit is a minimum of once per year for the first 2 years, right? This is all so new. It gives you a chance to find things that aren't working and all of that. And then I would say after that fact, you can do it every 3 years. Once you've got your, once you're moving, you don't need to go in a whole bunch and review, especially if you have checks and balances in place already. like you have your checklist and they know what's expected, and someone's reviewing to make sure all the checkpoints are met. You can go in every 3 years, 3 to 5 years, and I wouldn't push it to 5, but 3 years is a good number to go in and do this process with the organization to ensure everything is aligned and looking good. So I would absolutely think about doing this a minimum of every 3 years once you're set up. So large district may pick a percentage of files that will be reviewed. So you're doing your audit with your personnel files specifically. You can pick a percentage, meaning like if you had 2,000 positions that you hired for, then you may say, our goal is to analyze 1 to 3%, right? And then you're going to be looking at those files. Smaller districts, you can just choose a number. You can say, we'll look at 5 to 10 files every 3 years. We'll give ourselves an audit or hire someone. So it's a little bit easier to do, but come up with your anticipated number that's going to give you a good idea of what's happening, keep you in the loop in terms of what's actually happening in the hiring process. Remember, we're offering our training, like at least your face-to-face training should be offered at least once a year, and then you may have other ways for people to prove that they've gotten it. So if you may say the first time is face-to-face, but after that, they only need to have it every other year, or they can do an autonomous one in between, whatever the case may be, but figure out what they're going to need. I do like to do it before the hiring season for a teacher, for people who are going to be hiring staff for the new school year, because there's a lot of information in general out there, and it's just a nice way of pulling it all together for your hiring managers when they have so many other things fighting for their attention. So it doesn't have to be a large number. Verify all hiring managers have been trained. That's the big one. So we've talked about auditing. Now we're going to talk about evaluation. Evaluation is something different. Actually, you know what? My apologies here. I needed to go to here. So this is in the handouts, right? And this can be used in any way that you like. This lady, Carrie Cox, is really fantastic. She works in accounting, and she has some really great information on managing all of the different aspects of HR that are relevant for all organizations. So determine the scope of the project. We talked about that. Determine the who will conduct it, and then present the findings and develop. So this is a little how to conduct it. And again, you can make metrics for each of these sections. I didn't show something with specific metrics because you're all going to go back and create something different. But if you're unsure, you can just type audit. And, for me, I would just do a checklist. I'd create a checklist of the things that I'm going to be looking for and check them off for each file, right? Check them off for each process, right? Did they do this? Did they do that? Etc. So I would create a checklist based on my anticipated, based on the policies. Let's see here. I think I can go back to 1 second here. Okay. So now we'll talk about evaluation. It's a bit different. So an audit tells us if the pieces that were required are there, right? An evaluation is a bit different. You're evaluating a process that critically examines a program. It involves collecting and analyzing information about a program's activities, characteristics, and outcomes. Its purpose is to make judgments about a program to improve its effectiveness and or to inform programming decisions. So evaluation is determining did we do what we said we were going to do, and if so, how well, and what needs to be improved. If not, how do we address that and and restart? So it's a little bit different. You're looking at your anticipated goals. So if you say you're going to improve diversity in your hiring process, reduce barriers to qualified candidates from diverse backgrounds, then we should see within that somewhere around a year to 18 months after implementation, we should start to see improvement in those numbers. And if not, then we have to go back and look at some other pieces. Then we may find out that the issue isn't the hiring process, but might be in the recruitment process. So we would go and we would look at our recruitment process. But ultimately, we're looking at, did we accomplish what we said we were going to accomplish? What we evaluate, the project. Was the project on budget? Was the project on schedule? Did the project reach completion? This is how we look at a project evaluation, right? So this isn't an audit of, because if we're looking at an audit, we would say, do we have the documentation of what was spent, or how much time and what it cost us? Were we on budget, right? I'm sorry, not on budget, but do we have the documentation for budgeting? Was the project on schedule? That's a way of evaluating a project. Remember, time is money. So if we say we're going to take a year and it ends up taking 2, well, then we're not only off schedule, we're over budget. So did the project reach completion? Remember, we saw those numbers about how few projects reach completion. It has a lot to do with planning and management. So did the goals with the program you're looking at, did the program meet its goals? Barriers to qualified candidates have been reduced. Managers are trained in appropriate laws. There's an increase in diverse candidates succeeding. These would be some of the things that you might start out with in terms of your goals. So when we're evaluating a program, did the program meet its objectives, right? Did the project meet its objectives is a little bit different than the program. The project objective may be to roll all of this out, right? And we did create training and managers did attend and so on. But then the program is, again, how does it impact the overall outcome? So there are several different types of evaluation, and it's several different types of evaluations. We hear the term evaluation a lot in education, and you've probably participated in some type of evaluation, including employee evaluation. You've probably received employee evaluation or evaluations for teachers. There's lots of talk about that and the appropriate ways to do it. With impact evaluation, what we're looking to do is we're identifying, quantifying, and analyzing the implementation of a program, policy, or project. So is a program, policy, or project achieving its goals, right? If it is, then there's an assumption of impact, right? How can the overall program be improved? What has the overall impact been, right? So now we're talking about, is there a change in culture? Are people more willing to talk about equity in the organization? Are they now more concerned about being equitable in the hiring process and in other areas? And that's, again, that's getting into the overall impact. And you want to support that through qualitative and quantitative data. Qualitative could be done through a survey. People feel more confident about hiring now. They're less afraid of being inequitable or being accused of being inequitable. They're confident about working with candidates from different backgrounds and are comfortable doing that, right? That would be something qualitative that doesn't necessarily have a number to it, but it's impacting culture and how people feel about the program or project. The quantitative data, again, is looking out a year or so. those numbers are the number of diverse candidates are improving, and the quality of the candidates overall are improving as well. And so you might say, last year, our percentages look like this. This year the percentages of qualified candidates look like this. There's lots of different ways to communicate the qualitative data, but the quantitative data, but you're looking to identify what it is and how it's improving. And so what was the overall impact is the big question. You don't do a project unless you're going to have impact. So it's a very, very important piece. Outcome evaluation. Okay, so used to examine whether a project's expected results achieved and what are the unexpected outcomes. So sometimes you implement something and something that wasn't part of the plan happens, good or bad. You're analyzing that, right? Did this trigger something else in a positive or unexpected way? What is the feedback about the equitable hiring initiative? So what are people saying? What is the community? What are all your stakeholders saying? What is the board, the superintendent, the community, the employees? What are they all saying about this initiative? What do the numbers say? What community perspective on the initiative? Were the goals of the initiative appropriate? Right. Remember, we talked about you can't order from a menu, which is hard for people, right? They really like the menu. They want to order up exactly how many people of a certain background from the protected classes that they need, so they can put them up and say we're equitable, and then that creates an inequity. So we're not ordering from a menu. We have to really dig in and create systems for equity. And so we have to ensure that we have appropriate goals from the beginning, and then again build our project out to make sure that we reach those. Remember our lessons learned registry. We're keeping all the things we learned. Like maybe you roll out your training for your hiring managers autonomously. You have an autonomous way of them learning, and they don't like it, right? So no one's finishing it because they don't like it, or maybe there's a technical issue that no one can finish it. So you're going to put that kind of information in lessons learned, like don't use this platform, or if you use this platform, we must have this piece, and those become our organizational assets. Finally, summative. We pull it all together, right? And talk about, this is when we can blend our project and our program together. We talk about the success of the project, right? We were on time, we were on budget. We hit our deliverables, our checkpoints on time. For the program, all of our managers have been trained and are implementing these policies and procedures. Here's the feedback from both the project, the overall project, from stakeholders, and then here's the feedback about what they're feeling, what they feel they've learned. You pull it all together. How has it changed the company culture? What were lessons learned that can be applied in other areas? What were the positive lessons learned? What were things you learned never to do again? And you complete this after your audit and your other evaluations. And this becomes the platform for your report, right? Your final report for your project includes all of these pieces in there. And if you've been managing all of your documentation and, again, those versions and all of that, you have a nice little book of work that you can, pull into a PDF with a nice cover and your table of contents and all of that explains all of the work you've done over the 12 to 18 months. And Dr. Garth has been through that process. And then again, if you're working with a DOJ consent order, then you send that to those folks, those attorneys. If you are, working with your board, they may want to at least see where it's at, and they may not go through all of it, but and that becomes an organizational asset that you can use every time you want to look at doing an initiative, in particular in the world of equity. So we've lightly talked about tracking and documenting. I just want to make sure that you understand that it's not the same as data collection. Data collection is basically where someone, like you take that file and you send it to somebody and you don't know what happens after it. Tracking and documenting means that somebody is analyzing and knows what's happened. So tracking means, well, I know that there were 10 applicants who applied that were qualified. Here are 3. I know that this department regularly follows the policies and procedures, or this person needs some additional support. So you're tracking to make sure all along. Documenting is if you're seeing issues in your immediate audits, you're documenting that. If you have someone who needs additional support, there's a place where the information can be found. And that's very important. Again, we talked about documentation a lot. Well, the PII and storage and all of that, you want to make sure you're tracking all of that so that you know where it's at. So that's the other piece of tracking. You know where to find this information. So the person who collects the data may not review and analyze it, right? You may turn it into me. I may sit in the front office and I'm the administrative assistant and somebody drops off documents to me. So I'm now in data collection, right? But I'm not analyzing it. I'm going to give it to someone else. So what is that process? And if I left it with you and something happened and you don't have it, I should be able to know, oh, you probably put it in this space. You probably handed it to that person. So making sure you know where your documentation is at all times. So that if you ever have to show it, again, you know where to find it, because it would be tragic to do all this work really well, really beautifully, and then to find yourself in a situation where there's a liability because you can't find it, right? And you haven't stored it appropriately in a way that it can be accessed. So understand who's responsible for those pieces. Assign someone to that work. Remember, we have responsible, accountable, supported, consulted, and informed. So understand who's on that RACI chart or that RACI diagram for tracking and documenting. Again, I just want to say in the beginning, once per year, until you know you've got it down, and then you can start moving into every 3 years once it's down packed. So we've talked about proof now. We talked about the different ways we can do it. I want to add that I did not include performance in here. There is a document for performance, which is different than evaluation and auditing. So remember, auditing is what's supposed to be in there. Evaluation is, did we reach our objectives and outcomes? But performance is, how well did we do those things, right? So performance says, okay, we met our outcomes, but these were areas that we weren't so good at, right? We need improvement in these areas. So maybe everyone goes to the training, but they only implement 50% of what they learned. So that would be a performance measure, right? That a key performance indicator that lets you know that there may be some issue with your training. So you want to keep an eye out for your key performance measures as well, just as a side note. So those can indicate gaps. And so that's why you want to keep an eye on those pieces. The importance of proof is that it provides validity, reliability. It helps us prove impact, right? It builds trust within the community, right? If we are saying we're going to do these things and we don't ever measure them, then how do we know it happened, right? So that's why we keep track of our time and effort and scheduling, and we're communicating all the way. Because if we do all of this and we don't share it out, we don't communicate it, it's not that it's gone to waste. It's that it creates a lack of trust in the community that you said you were going to do something and then we never heard about it again. So make sure your lines of communication are open with all of your stakeholders. If you have a public relations team or communications team, you may want to partner with them on the best way to share this information out. But again, particularly if you have a community who is really involved in these efforts and very concerned and invested in them, it needs to be more frequent than, if you have a community that's really invested, you might want to put it in your weekly newsletter, like where you're at, what you've achieved, what your next step is. You could do that, or you can put it in your monthly newsletter. So just think about, again, what those needs are for communication. It's a contribution to a body of work to help close gaps. So once you've done this and you've got your lessons learned, maybe perhaps unwillingly, you are now somewhat of an expert in this process, even if it didn't work out the way you think, because very few organizations have gotten to a place where they're able to focus on this work. And again, they're exposed to a lot of liabilities. So you doing this work can help other districts who are in need of doing this work as well. You're contributing to that body of knowledge. Your project information is their assets to the educational community at large. So, and that is valuable. And I encourage you to think about when you go through this process, how to share your knowledge and experience and your lessons learned. Think about that. So we're talking about stakeholders, but then how do you share it to the education community at large, those lessons that you've gotten, those tricks, and ideas of how to do the project better. All those pieces really help create not just a district, right, that's equitable, but a world, right, a city, a state, and a country that's more equitable in its approach. And so the work, when you do this, it is valuable work to your community and beyond. So, process evaluation. How successfully was the strategy laid out in the project or a logic model? This is just another way of looking at it. I like to give you guys multiple ways to look at the same thing. What parts of the process were complicated or unclear? Which parts of the process worked well? I think this is not supposed to be in there. This is from process. Okay, so let's move on to what to do if diverse candidates are missing. So now you've done your equitable hiring processes are all in place. You've been a project managing superstar. And so you've got your project charter and your business cases and your policies that were formally adopted. Now you've broken down those policies into processes and procedures. You are you've trained your hiring managers. They understand what's expected of them. They are out there. They're now equity superstars, making sure that they're reducing barriers to qualified candidates from diverse backgrounds and protected classes. And you're still not getting people through the door. You're still not getting all of the candidates you would like to see. And that's okay. That may happen. But one of the things you might want to think about for your organization is creating a recruitment toolkit. And so this is things and ways to, for your hiring managers to increase and improve the number and diversity of people coming or applying for the job. It doesn't have to be detailed. It could be like, share it out with this group of people. It could be a mailing list, right, that you have. Remember, we talked about that welcome packet, which is, even though I may not be getting hired yet, when I look for a job, I go to the website and I see what's there to try to determine if this culture right? The culture of the organization is somewhere that I can work, somewhere where I belong. And so creating those visible pieces, not only is it helpful for when someone actually comes on board, a welcome packet, but it is also something that can attract people who are trying to figure out if they want to work for your organization. Because I will tell you, one of the things that teachers have to figure out when they're applying to jobs that are some distance from where they currently live is, how are they going to move? How are they going to meet people? Where are they going to live? How do they find someone with all of those pieces? So a welcome packet can really help with that. Diverse organizations that may have a supply of candidates. So reach out to different organizations where qualified candidates might be. We talked about adult education candidates with degrees. These are typically in ESL programs. Oftentimes, they may be at the tail end of a program. And so you may be able to help them go through an alternative certification program. Cheryl spoke about that yesterday, that they're looking at moving community members into alternative teaching certification programs. Parent newsletters. If you're trying to hire, share that with parents. You'll be surprised at how many people know someone who's looking for a job or might be a good fit or interested. Chamber of Commerce, there are many of them. Make sure they're one of your partners. You need those businesses in there for a variety of reasons, including hiring and recruiting. Professional organizations. I know one of the organizations that I sometimes recruit from is an energy organization, and a few engineering organizations as well. When we're trying to find math teachers from diverse backgrounds, there's all kind of those organizations, and when people retire, they're oftentimes looking for a second career. So I'm always reaching out to them to see if there's anybody who's recently retired who's looking for a new career. HBCUs, Hispanic serving institutions, your local universities, alternative teaching certification programs. Do you have a relationship with one of those programs? If you don't, you should. If you, some districts have their own programs, but if you don't, then you should absolutely be connecting with those folks. So make sure to reach out to them and develop a relationship. Montessori chat rooms. This is one that a lot of people don't think about, but Montessori teachers oftentimes have bachelor's degrees and they're certified as Montessori teachers. But I will tell you, having worked in a Montessori school, it takes years to get your certification, and then your salary is $25,000 to $29,000. So one of the things that everyone used to ask me from my former employment is, how do I get certified so that I can actually get a teacher salary, a normal teacher salary? So it's a good way to attract someone with diverse skills in teaching from the Montessori background, and they're already in the classroom. And then the other thing is partner up with a university and start a cohort. Remember, we talked about parents who are in these ESL classes, and they will say that their dream job is actually to work at a school, to work in a school system, so they can be on a similar schedule to their child. And so they may not have the degree, but remember, we talked about that there's lots of ways of getting them into the classroom. It might be paraprofessional, it might be an education aid, but creating a pathway in partnership with your community college and your local universities to move people quickly through the process. Because, like I said, there's been programs that were created that could get someone into the classroom within a few weeks, and then progressively build them up to become a teacher over a 3-year period. So think outside the box. I'm going to take a breather. That was a lot of information. Does anybody have any questions or comments, or something that's worked and helped them get more candidates through the door? The one we heard yesterday was really great about partnering with alternative, moving community members into alternative teaching programs. Anyone else have any suggestions on getting candidates, on recruiting candidates? Give you a little while here. And I think, let me ask my presenter and my tech person, open the mics. Okay, I have to go down a little bit. Recruiting through social media. Sissy, yes. A lot of people forget about that. Yeah, that's a great way to communicate with your community at large, right? Your parents and all of that. They're usually following your district and school sites. I love that. Social media. Sissy, what social media do you guys use? You guys using Facebook or Instagram, Pinterest? I don't know. Which ones are you using? LinkedIn. That one's awesome. Facebook. Awesome. Yeah, there's some really creative ways to use social media. If you have someone dedicated in your district, they probably know a million different ways to share that information out in ways that are unique and fun, etc. But I love that. Anyone else have some suggestions for recruitment of diverse candidates? Let's see here. Okay. Anyone else have any suggestions for recruitment? All right. So the last little piece, we'll talk about some of the documents specifically for your project evaluation template. Remember what we're trying to figure out. Oh, I'm sorry, Miss Cheryl. Cheryl says our future educator clubs. Cheryl, yes. Yes. In fact, that was one of the things we suggest, IDRA suggests for a lot of the districts that we work with. You need a future educator club. If you don't have one of those, if you're in this presentation and you don't have one of those, you must get one. You must get one. You must have one. Those are some of the people those are already in your community. They're already at your school. It's a beautiful opportunity for your current students to come back and work for your district. And in that, like I said, make sure that part of that ecosystem, right? And that's what you have to create, is an ecosystem around recruitment, includes universities as well, who will have those programs in place that your students can also visit and learn from. Cheryl, if you don't mind, could you jump on and talk about your clubs a bit? I'm seeing that a few people haven't heard of it. You should be able to enable your mic. Rosalind said, please. You should be able to enable your mic. Okay, let me go back to my tech person here.
Okay, I think it's on now. It kept saying turning on, turning on.
Can you talk a little bit about your Future Educators Club?
Sure. We really did this as a push 2 years ago, I think, is when as we were doing some brainstorming within ourselves and we have a minority recruitment initiative and a committee, and we still meet once a month. We've been meeting for probably over 2 years now, 3 years, and have had some faithfuls who are there. We started out with a large group, and I thought about with that temperature template, those we have that are high interest but low influence, and then we had some high influence, low interest, but then we have some with very much the opposite. But anyway, out of that committee, we looked into the Florida Future Educator Clubs, and we're fortunate that we have a small college in our area. It used to be a community college, and now it is a small college that has a teacher education program, and so we're able to connect these future educator students early on with Chipola College. But we looked for at each high school and we actually have it now at our middle schools too, but look for a teacher who is excited about teaching, who we knew would not just be, oh good, I get another supplement to to do this activity, but that would do a good job of recruiting students to be in the club. We really do focus on recruitment of minority students to be in that club. That we are trying to look at your population as a student of teachers and having teachers that look like you. We need more. The students coming behind you, we need that more. And so kind of went from that effort with the minority students, trying to get them in the club. And so our club advisors, that's part of their job, recruit, get members, and then they do a variety of activities to give the students opportunities in the classroom. They take several trips to Chipola to the education program there and get to meet those staff that are part of that program, so that we already get them hooked in the idea that you can go to college. It's very affordable. You don't have to leave home if you think college is out of my reach. They talk to them about how they can get scholarships and start preparing them that yes, you can do this, and we'd really love to have you in teaching. And they actually this year had a signing where, just like you do athletic signings for an athlete to go to the school, when those students finish their AA degree, they sign them as going into that education program. And of course we celebrate that with them and highlight them on our Facebook page and our future teachers. And it has brought more of a pipeline into our program, and it has also increased their enrollment in their program. Their enrollment was sustaining itself. It wasn't at the risk of being closed by the state, but it had been dwindling down over the years, and that enrollment has increased. And it has directly provided us teachers at once they're in that program, then we get as many as we can back interning in our school. And there's other small counties around us that are competing too, but in the past we didn't really go after those interns. It was, they called us to place when, we'll see if we have a spot. And now it is, we actively seek them out and make sure they're with a really good, solid supervising teacher, and have been able to hire many students, from that program.
I love that. There was a lot of great pieces of gold in that, Cheryl. So, I mean, even just the part about going after the interns, I see a lot of districts that don't see that or haven't recognized that yet as a potential pipeline, right? They make it, sometimes it's really difficult for an intern to be placed there. So thinking about that, if I have a difficult time getting placed, I may not come back around for employment. So building those relationships is really, really key. And you heard Cheryl said they have a relationship with the college, right? So
Yes,
it's mutually beneficial. That's huge. It sounds like Florida has a state program, a future educators club.
they do, and our clubs have gone to the convention, and then the Chipola, they have a summer long workshop that they do several days that our future educator clubs get to go and be there with our teachers. They do this 3 day, I think it's 3 day. They do this in-service program, and our teachers that are currently teaching can go to it and be there with the Chipola students, and then our high school students also go and participate.
That's amazing. That's fantastic. That is, yeah. And though what you find is that those students who went through that process, like they're not leaving the district, right? They're going to
Right.
be when
Right.
you those folks.
Yes.
They're
And then that's,
go ahead.
yeah, we're in a small rural area, and we've tried and we've gone to career events, and we'll continue to go to career events at some of the colleges, and we're fortunate that Tallahassee is not far from us. But we found to leave Tallahassee, or some of these students that are from Tampa or large urban areas, to come to Marianna, that's very small. We don't have a shopping mall. We've got a lot of natural resources. There's fishing and things like that, but it's just hard to draw a young person to come to Marianna or to Jackson County, very small towns. We have a Walmart, and we have a few local restaurants and some chains, but there's just not a lot to externally to draw someone here. But if there's someone with family ties that has their roots in Jackson County, and we can get them in education, then we find they're going to stay with us a long time.
Very good. And I would say, even though there might not be a lot to get young people, seem like there's a lot to get young people to come. Right now, there is a lot of people making a push to go back to small towns as well. So
Yes.
yeah, advertising that there's fishing. I mean, I'm actually there now, Cheryl.
That was part of when we went to the career fairs. We had got from the Chamber of Commerce a lot of things and the highlights of some of those things, and that's what we would tell those students. There's some benefits to a small town, and some benefits to being in an area where there are a lot of natural resources that are. And, some of them would be interested, but we just found we weren't getting the fruits from those efforts that's when we thought we've got to do something else to open that pipeline. And,
yes, I think
and I said 3 years. It's probably been 5 years that we've been doing that, because we had our first graduates last year.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think going back to Sissy, who was talking about LinkedIn, if you, like I said, if you can advertise, if you've got some beautiful shots of your town and little sound bites, I mean, people are ready to live in smaller areas now. So you've got the small town is quite attractive right now. So a lot of potential there, but you guys have done an awesome job. I love hearing about the Future Educators Club. I didn't know that Florida had one that was statewide, so that's new information. But yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much, Cheryl.
Welcome.
Does anybody else want to talk about some of the things that have worked for them in terms of recruitment? You should be able to come off the mic. I also want to point out that Cheryl mentioned the Chamber of Commerce. That is that should be one of your main partners, whatever level your school district is. It may not be called Chamber, maybe called something else, but they are one of your primary partners in in general, not just in the equity piece and the recruitment piece, but in general, you should be leveraging the resources that they have. There's a vested interest for them in supporting those efforts to ensure that they have, sufficient people coming into their industry in the area as well, the different industries. And but they usually do a really, really great job of being involved. Anyone else want to talk about some recruitment efforts? Going once, going twice. All right. So the project evaluation template, let's take a look at that. We'll probably finish a little bit early, but this is the templates that I've posted in the handouts. Remember to make sure you have all of them. There's the 5 Ps. Remember, you're thinking along those lines for creating your system and project. So the project evaluation template is what you're going to use to really help you figure out whether or not you've met your the outcomes, the anticipated outcomes for your project. And keeping in mind, you can use project and program interchangeably, although they're for the purpose of the document, although you're analyzing and evaluating those in different ways. Your project is, we set out to do something in a project, in that bubble of a project, like we had an initiative, we're going to train everyone, etc. And we've done that. And then your program evaluation is did it end up with the results that we thought we were going to get from doing it, right? So do we have improved numbers, improved outcomes, improved applicants, increased applicants from diverse backgrounds? Have we reduced barriers? Don't forget also, we saw in the video, there's lots of ways to reduce the barriers for folks. So if you are a school district, for instance, that has an after-school program and you want to attract those parents who are, who would like to apply, but childcare is an issue, you may want to think about having the interviews a little bit later so that they have the option of dropping their child off at the after-school program. I would get some documents signed, around liability, but you can provide it as an opportunity as well. I mean, as a support mechanism as well. So you can think outside of the box in terms of opening the door to new candidates, right? To more candidates. So you see right here, you're going to title your project, which is going to be equitable hiring, or maybe you're a little more creative than that. You can come up with something really fancy that that alludes to that moderator, or essentially that's your sponsor. So project overview: what were the original goals and the objective of the project? What was the original criteria of the project success? Remember, we determined success from the beginning. We may have to make adaptations, but that's okay. But we want to know what it is we're trying to do from the get-go. And then any additional comments you have around that, there's a nice little space in this document for that. What were the major accomplishments, right? What were some things that you did really well in the project management? Maybe it was pulling your stakeholders together, right? Maybe that turned out to be a shining moment in the project, like people really came out of the woodwork to show up and support the initiative. Maybe the training was an instant success and the feedback is overwhelmingly positive about how folks feel about the training. So you're just going to highlight what some of the major accomplishments were, what methods worked well. We talked about, lessons learned. That's part of it, not just what didn't work out, right? But what worked really well. What was found to be particularly useful to accomplish the project. Sometimes, well, almost always when you're managing a project, you find little tips and tricks that you can share about the project. You write them in this section again so that you're documenting and it becomes an asset for the organization. And then again, more additional comments. what elements of the project went wrong? So now we're talking about our lessons learned. You don't have to put everything in there, but what were some of the really, big pieces that went well? Maybe I will tell you one common thing is not remembering to engage all the stakeholders, and it's oftentimes not intentionally, but sometimes it's because you didn't know someone was a stakeholder, and then they are upset that they were left out of the decision-making process or the project. So and sometimes there's nothing you can do about that. You do your best to do your due diligence to make sure everyone is aware of the project and has their say. Don't forget, you can expand your stakeholder list once you identify them, so they can be added, but you're going to keep that information on your document as well, whatever highlights there were. What specific process needs improvement? We talked about processes, so this is a project management process. So what parts of the project, didn't work out so well? Maybe it was in this case the identification of the stakeholder, and that's how it was missed. So you're going to put whatever part in there was needed. And remember, you're going to do the same thing for your program as well. So we're talking about project, but you would go back and do the same thing for your program evaluation or your initiative evaluation. List any technical challenges. You will have technical challenges. That's a guarantee. If you're meeting on Zoom, there'll be times it doesn't work. Figuring out sometimes just who can put things where and move things, and set things up can be a challenge as well. So anticipate some type of technical challenge in some way. But then you can, by listing it the next time around, you have a plan in place, so you don't have to worry about reliving it for every time, for every project. List continuing development and maintenance objectives. So remember, we talked about, okay, we've launched our project and we've met our outcomes. We're successful. Everyone's trained and using these equitable hiring processes, but it's not, the project closes, but it's not the end of the work, right? The work still has to be continued. There's maintenance pieces. How often are you going to train? How often are you going to audit? What are the resources you need to do those things? What is your recruitment process going to look like? How are you going to recruit those diverse candidates through the door? So all of those pieces, are part of maintenance. So we have the main project, which is to get something up and going, right? And then we have the maintenance piece. And the person who runs the project is not necessarily the person who does and ensures the maintenance, right? A project manager is just that. They manage the project. So you have to figure out those pieces as well. It might be something that has to be handed off to HR after it's implemented, right? So you're thinking about those things in the beginning of your project as well. What actions still need to be completed and who is responsible for completing them? So oftentimes when you have a project, right, there's additional work to be done even after you're implementing. And this is why I said plan on doing your audit for at least 2 years, because you're going to still be making changes after. So this is a nice place to list those things. List any additional outstanding project items, anything that, at the close of the project or at the end of your project deadline, it's, is still needing some completion or additional efforts and resources. So this is in the traditional project management. You have phases. We didn't go over phases because project management alone by itself, it's hours and hours and hours. And so project management isn't our focus. It's more of how to manage an equitable hiring project or initiative. So if you're interested in, hardcore project management, I do encourage you to do some homework and research. There's lots of resources on there. I do encourage school districts to have some groups of people who are qualified project managers. It doesn't mean you have to get a credential or anything, but that you've gotten some specific training around managing projects. It helps things. It helps keep a lot of things from going awry in terms of, just managing all your projects, including grants and all of those things. So I encourage you to have someone in your district. It may now be you. So I wish you the best of luck if that's you. And let's see, lessons. Oh, I think I skipped over one. Nope, just lessons learned. This one's really long because they've divided it by the phases. You don't have to do the phases, but this one was execution. This is the implementation of the project. So what did you learn in that process? What did you learn in, let me see if I can, there we go. Nope. Human factors, what were lessons learned? We talked about missing the stakeholders, technology, there's nobody in this position to do this part of the technology that needs to be done. All the different things that you learn from the actual people participating in it and how it impacted the program. And then overall lessons learned. And the reason why I like this particular outline is because, again, for people who may not have, gone through this process, it really divides it up in a way that, speaks to their potential interests as well. And it keeps those things, again, if I'm looking at a project that was formally done, I can take this and really get some highlights on lessons learned so I don't have to repeat those same mistakes. So it makes it a really good organizational asset. And of course, project manager, date and signed. You're saying I did it. It was me. My name is on the project. I'm one of the responsible parties. And so I like this document. So this is another one where it's rather similar, but remember you have to write a report. So I think this may actually be the same one. This is not the right one. But remember, all of these documents help you with your final report, right? So when you're done with your project, there's someone who's going to want to hear everything that was done and all the successes and all of that. And so while this highlights it, your actual report goes into more detailed information, right, about those outcomes, and it may have your analytics, right, your qualitative and quantitative data, with all the nice little pictures and images and pie charts and things like that, to make it readable. But remember, we talked a little bit about performance. So this is kind of just a way of highlighting your performance within the project and within the program as well. Again, it's interchangeable. You don't need different documents to do this process with either the project or the program. Just change it to say project. So this one is, we've got meeting dates, meeting time. You don't have to have all of that, but meeting objectives. I don't know why it says meetings, but you should be able to put your information here for your objectives, your timeline, and your budget, right? Those are the big ones. Remember, I've said it over and over again. It's very important that you see the time and effort that you're putting into this project as dollars. And not just for this project, for any project you ever manage. There's no such thing as free time if you're working and being paid. Not for you, not for any of the people within the organization. And it's a way that organizations tend to lose money, is not calculating time and effort that it takes to get something done. So did we get desired results? What went well? What could have been better? What could we do differently next time? Actions for the future, and then your nice little wrap up. So this is in the handouts. All the documents, recruiting a more diverse workforce is there. It's a great bit of information on, let's see if I have it, on an organization that has done this, University Health Services. They went through a similar process. And so this just gives you an idea. This is their report, right? This is what they've written up, but reading their report gives you an idea of the kind of information you may want to have in there. So your role as a supervisor manager, job description tips. They talk about appropriate ways of getting your job description together. Just a really great piece of information here. Recruiting best practices, where to send job openings. They've got lists, when you're looking at increasing the number of teachers from the group that you're serving, you want to target those professional organizations. Like I said, I target them a lot and try to find out people who are retiring and recruit them as well. But you can, any organizations, there's at least a few people who are interested in becoming a teacher. I find that to be the case. So this lists some organizations that kind of just help you think about where to look for teachers for recruitments, for applicants, potential applicants. It gives some tips on, before you go into an interview. So just take a look at that. It's a really good resource. I won't comb through all of it. Let me see here. I think I'm going to end on that note. I will stay on if you have any specific questions, but just to let you know, right now we've gone through all of the 5 Ps. We've gone through policy, process and procedure, practice, and now we've done proof. And so when you put these things into place, you now have a system, right? You have the things that govern us and help us understand what's important to the organization, right? Remember, it needs to be aligned to 2 things: law and strategic priorities. So all of your efforts should be able to be aligned to your strategic priorities. It's very important to be able to connect those. In processes, we learned that's the higher overview, and then the specific steps are the procedures. We talked about SOPs. When you're creating these new procedures, make sure you're creating your SOPs, which can be found and documented. We talked about practice. When you're rolling out your training, we learned about andragogy and the importance of andragogy. Remember, adults will not learn anything that does not solve a problem and isn't relevant. If you want to ensure you have no buy-in, make sure that it's not relevant to what they actually have to do. So again, keep that in mind. And then we went into proof, which is about making sure that after all the work is done, we've done what we said we were going to do. And if not, we know why, and then what our next steps need to be in order to make that happen. And then also you've learned the different types of auditing, the difference between auditing and evaluation, and a little bit on the difference between auditing, evaluation, and performance. And so now you guys are not only going to be able to roll out your equitable hiring initiatives, but equity initiatives all around the board. Because remember, this is not the last stop. This is sometimes, it may be your first step into equity. It may be your 10th step into equity. But remember that a project management process ensures the fidelity of the project, ensures you're staying on track and you're documenting. And in all things, you must document. And so on that note, thank you so much for joining me today. And for those of you who have continued to come in and come back for each session, my hat's off to you. This is not the lightest of topics. It's detailed, and it's not super light, but it is great information. And if you can apply it, I guarantee you it can be a game changer for your organization. So I will stay on for a few minutes to see if anyone has any questions. But other than that, thank you again, and it's been a real pleasure. Don't forget, our last session is at 1, and we'll be talking with Dr. Garth, who has gone through a lot of these processes, and she can give you more of a view on the district side about what it was like and some tips and tricks. And she's got a great presentation aligned, and then we'll wrap it all up in a nice bow, and then you'll go out into the world and implement your equity projects. And don't forget, you can call me, contact me, email me anytime you need. I'm going to put my email address here, and if you need something, do not hesitate. Don't be a stranger. And I'm very active on LinkedIn, so you can find me there as well. Put my email address here, and I will hopefully see you guys in at 1 for the last session.